Hello, my viewers, and welcome to a critical conversation about the harsh realities of slavery and the importance of accountability. Now, in this video, we are addressing a common misconception that's been perpetuated by some palm-color individuals who claim that they're being unfairly judged for the transatlantic slave trade. Now, in the video, you'll hear this palm-color man asking an ignorant question. But the truth is the last 500 years of slavery were uniquely perpetuated by palm-color people, specifically European colonizers and enslavers. Now, while it's true that other cultures had forms of slavery throughout history, the transatlantic slave trade was a distant and devastating system of exploitation that was fueled by palm-color supremacy and racism. 11 million Africans were forcibly enslaved and brought to the Americas, subjected to inhumane conditions and treated as less than human. Now, when we acknowledge the brutal legacy of slavery, we're not judging all palm-color people for the actions of their ancestors. We are holding accountable those who perpetuated and benefit from this system of oppression and working towards a future where justice and equality are a reality for all. So with that said, check out these videos as his fellow palm-color people school him on this. I will be right back.
I'm just going to ask this one more time. Why do we only judge white people for owning slaves when every culture had them?
I'm a little white sarcastic friend. How are you? Great question about why are white people judged for slavery when so many other cultures and civilizations did it. You're right. Back in ancient times, before 500 years ago, there were other slave trades. However, the last 500 years, it was white people perpetrating the Atlantic slave trade and the enslavement of Africans to the tune of 11 million Africans enslaved and brought to the Americas and all over the world. So when you say why, that's why. It's because for the last 500 years, we were the dominant people doing it. We started it, Europeans, people that look like me and you. Yeah, I know it's a simple answer and an obvious answer. And I know that you're a white apologist and you're in denial. And that you care much more about protecting white people than you do your brothers and sisters of color, brown and black folks, right? You'd much rather be a white apologist and have just an ounce of humanity and just an ounce of dignity and morality. So I tell you this for several reasons. It's obvious why. Because of the enslavement, because of the Atlantic slave trade, we created our people white supremacy, which benefits us today. That's right. It's hard to face. It's uncomfortable, but it's the fucking truth. Just look at the racial data all over every single American institution and every single American system. Continues to be discrimination benefiting white people and hurting and oppressing brown and black folks. Reality, it'll do you good. But you're not interested in reality, are you? You're interested in protecting whiteness and protecting the status quo, white supremacy. And that's exactly what you're doing. Maybe one day you'll find an ounce of humanity and just a little bit of morality. One more thing to add to it. White people created something new 500 years ago called chattel slavery. You ever heard of that? Look it up. Chattel slavery was that enslavement for the first time in history where human beings were treated as commodities, property. They could never, ever have freedom. And furthermore, they were dehumanized. And because of white supremacy, they were treated as animals, even less than animals. Free to rape, free to abuse, free to murder. That's called chattel slavery, unregulated slavery, where people lose their humanity. That is why white people are blamed and judged for slavery. And because we continue to benefit from it. When? Today. Check your facts. Racial discrimination in every single American institution, every single system in America. White supremacy continues to reign. Reality.
In the United States of America, what group of people held slaves? Take all the time you need. Should you feel bad over slavery? Because it was fucking slavery. And this whole thing, everybody had slaves. Everybody includes us, doesn't it? Your argument is self-defeating. I understand. You don't feel bad about racism, slavery. You are a whole white supremacist, cradle to the grave. We should always feel bad when people are oppressed and harmed. We should have an empathetic heart. The systems that came out of slavery persist to this day. Slavery ended in the United States, or was supposed to end, 1865, which is less than 200 years ago. Which is what? 2 generations? 3 for being generous? There are people alive today that were beat and spit on during desegregation. Segregation was a system that was birthed in and out of slavery. You don't feel guilty about any of this because you're a piece of shit. And that's why nothing changes in this country. Because at the top of the mountain, the people with the largest megaphones push, perpetuate, and thrive in racist ideas. You think having no empathy and no remorse are noble ventures. You can't work on the heart of a country if you ain't worked on your own first. I'll be damned if the white supremacists have the last say in this country. Way to go!
Because we live in North America. Name me a culture in this side of the planet that had slaves that didn't look like me and you. Or that didn't commit genocide. Or that didn't kill their slave because they got pregnant after they got raped. Yeah, that happened numerous times. And why do you not want to judge people that had slaves? Why do you think we shouldn't be judged? Certain shit you don't get a pass on ever. We committed genocide, we committed slavery, and we committed some of the most horrible things a human being has done to another human.
Now, the audacity of ignorance. The gentleman in the video is a perfect example of how palm color privilege and ignorance can be a toxic combination. His question, why do we only judge palm color people for owning slaves when every culture had them, is a masterclass in historical revisionism and deflection. Let's set the record straight. The transatlantic slave trade was a uniquely brutal and devastating system of exploitation that was perpetuated by palm-colored Europeans. It's not about judging palm-colored people, but about acknowledging the historical facts and taking responsibility for the ongoing impact of slavery and artisanship. Now, the idea that every culture had slaves is a gross oversimplification of complex historical context. Yes, slavery existed in various forms throughout history, but the transatlantic slave trade was a distinct and catastrophic event that was fueled by palm-color supremacy and artisanship. The gentleman's question is a classic example of deflection, attempting to shift the focus away from the specific role that palm-color people played in the transatlantic slave trade. It's a tired tactic that ignores the ongoing legacies of slavery and artisanship and the continued struggles of Black people for justice and equality. In short, I feel his question is not only historically inaccurate, but also morally bankrupt. It's time to stop deflecting and start confronting the harsh realities of slavery and artisanship, and to work towards a future where justice and equality are a reality for all. Now, American history begins with the creation of a myth to absolve palm-color settlers of the genocide of Native Americans, the false belief that non-palm-color people are less human than palm-color people. Now, this belief in racial hierarchy survived slavery's abolition, fueled racial terror, unalivings, demanded legally codified segregation, and spawned mass incarceration crisis. The dehumanizing myth of racial difference endures even today. Between 1501 and 1867, nearly 13 million African people were kidnapped, forced onto European and American ships, and trafficked across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas, including the British, French, and Spanish colonies that would later comprise the United States. 2 million people got unalived during the barbaric Middle Passage. The global trafficking that separated millions of women, men, and children from their homes, families, and cultures destabilized African countries and left them vulnerable to conquest, colonization, and violence for centuries. And in the Americas, a caste system based on race and color emerged in tandem with legal and political systems to codify palm color supremacy, and enshrine enslavement as a permanent and hereditary status. Now, that racial hierarchy continues to haunt the nation today. Coastal communities across the U.S. were permanently shaped by the trafficking of African people. Local economies in New England, Boston, New York City, in the Middle Atlantic, Virginia, Richmond, the Carolinas, Charleston, Savannah, and the Deep South, and New Orleans were built around the enslavement of Black people. Kidnapping, trafficking, abusing, and dehumanizing African people and our descendants created generational wealth for Europeans and palm-color Americans across occupations and industries. From early European colonies to priests and popes, shipbuilders to rum and textile producers, bankers to insurers, the transatlantic slave trade generated the capital that was used to build some of America's greatest cities and most successful companies. Many families, businessmen, and institutions continue to benefit today from the enormous wealth produced by enslavement, but few have acknowledged or honestly confronted this history. Beginning in the 17th century, millions of African people were kidnapped, enslaved, and shipped across the Atlantic to the Americas under horrific conditions. Nearly 2 million people got unalived at sea during the agonizing journey. For the next 2 centuries, the enslavement of Black people in the United States created wealth, opportunity, and prosperity for millions of Americans. As American slavery evolved, an elaborate and enduring mythology about the inferiority of Black people was created, legitimate, perpetuate, and defend slavery. Now, this mythology survived slavery's formal abolition from the Civil War. In the South, where the enslavement of Black people was widely embraced, resistance to ending slavery persisted for another century after the 13th Amendment passed in 1865. Today, 150 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, very little has been done to address the legacy of slavery and its meaning in contemporary life. In many communities, like Montgomery, Alabama, which by 1860 was the capital of the domestic slave trade in Alabama, there is little understanding of the slave trade, slavery, or the understanding effort to sustain the racial hierarchy that slavery created. In fact, an alternative narrative has emerged in many Southern communities that celebrates the slavery era, honors slavery's principal proponents and defenders, and refuses to acknowledge or address the problems created by the legacy of slavery. More reason why this statement, why do we only judge palm-colored people for owning slaves when every culture had them, is a prime example of ignorant privilege and a blatant disregard for the unique historical and ongoing struggles of Black people. This statement not only minimizes the transatlantic slave trade's brutality, but also erases the systemic racism and oppression that has persisted long after slavery's legal abolition. By equating the transatlantic slave trade with other forms of slavery throughout history, palm-colored individuals demonstrate a profound ignorance of the distinct historical and cultural context. Now, this false equivalency ignores the transatlantic slave trade's unprecedented scale, its foundation in WS, and its enduring impact on Black lives. Moreover, this statement shifts the focus away from the accountability of palm-colored people for their role in perpetuating slavery and racism, instead placing the burden on Black people to justify why Black people are judged for something they did not perpetrate. Now, this is a textbook example of gaslighting and victim blaming. It is important for palm-colored individuals to educate themselves about the transatlantic slave trade's history and its ongoing legacies. Listen to Black voices and acknowledge their privilege and role in perpetuating racism. We have finally come to the end of the video. What do you, my viewers, have to say? Share your thoughts as well in the comment section. Thank you for always watching and see you in my next video.